Now, more stories, insights, and analysis of Illinois policy and politics. This is Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Once again, your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with John Tillman, President and CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute. IllinoisPolicy.org is the website. And John, we're talking a lot about polling these days because of the presidential race and other competitive primary elections. But this survey that comes to us from the Paul Simon Institute down at SIU, not part of the vast right-wing conspiracy.
No.
It's a survey essentially about right to work, and it presents some rather surprising results, at least if you just listen to what the politicians, including a lot of Republicans, say about kind of the unionization of Chicago and Illinois and why that means Chicago and Illinois will be a blue state forever.
Well, what I think is interesting is the conventional wisdom is that Illinois is never going to be a right-to-work state. It will always be a closed shop, which means that if you go to work someplace that's unionized, you have to join the union.
Just like Michigan will always be a right-to-work state.
Exactly.
I mean,
right.
never be a right-to-work state.
Right. So Michigan,
West Virginia, never be a right-to-work state.
Oh, there we go
state.
again. So
yeah.
we're up to 26 states now are right-to-work. And all that really means is that the worker, the individual worker, is free to choose whether or not to join a union when he goes to a workplace that's unionized. The union can't force him to join the union. This is an amazing empowerment of the individual, which the unions are against. And what I think is stunning about this poll is it turns out even a modest majority of union members would like to be free.
Yeah, that is what's really interesting about this. And I you can't read too much into this, but you can make some suppositions. And, perhaps they see the money coming out of their paycheck, their union dues, and they say, gosh, if I had the choice, would I stay in this union or not? Probably not. So that's essentially the market test that closed shops aren't put to, which is to say, do I think I'm getting value for the union dues I'm forced to pay in? And again, 50 by a measure of 51 to 44, union members saying, no, I'm not. I'd prefer to have the freedom.
Yeah, and it's even breaking it down is kind of fun. Overall, it's when you go all in, vote for or lean for being right to work, 61% in the statewide poll. But look at the breakdown among Democrats. 55%, I should say, of Democrats are vote for or lean for, 64% of independents, 69% of Republicans. So you essentially have consensus across the political landscape that Illinois should be right to work. And yet politicians are cowardly when it comes to this issue. Why do you think that is?
Well,
why are they so cowardly?
I think it's this public choice theory of economics explains this, the issue of concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. Right. So, yeah, do I think workers should have choice? If I'm a worker, do I want freedom to choose whether to join this or join that? Sure, I do. Is it something that motivates my vote? Is it something that motivates my activism? And the answer is probably not at the top of the list. Right. I have my own economic security concerns, particularly if I'm not a member of a union, if I'm not in a closed shop, which is a small percentage of the workforce, particularly in the private sector. And so you have this concentrated benefits, diffuse costs. The union bosses get the concentrated benefits, and the costs are spread over 13 million people. But because of the benefits they accrue, they bring resources to bear against those that would vote in line with the majority opinion on this, and it scares people from doing what they otherwise may be inclined to do.
And there's two things there that I think are great. First of all, those resources, by the way, they took it by the force of law.
Right.
They confiscated it from people's paychecks whether they wanted to or not.
And now because Scalia is gone, we're not going to probably not going to see a change in that from the Supreme Court that we otherwise might have seen this summer.
Certainly not this year, but maybe a follow-on case next year. But the other thing I think is interesting, Dan, is every time that there has been a little bit of courage in Michigan, West Virginia, Indiana, Wisconsin, you know what happened to all the people who supported right to work, the elected officials who voted for that?
They all lost.
Dan, that's wrong. I know that's what everybody thinks.
Right.
They actually all won. No one's losing elections because they supported setting workers free. And that's the lesson that we have to get out to the political class in Illinois. It's a winning issue.
Right. They're not losing elections because they're taking a position that is consistent
Popular.
with the majority. I mean, it's like a little bit of the kind of a Fox Butterfield effect here. Supports right to work and doesn't lose. Right. He didn't lose because he supported right to work.
Right.
These dots aren't connected. But the problem is you have the unions make an example of one or two, and it has a chilling effect on the others, because even if I think I could win, why do I want to face the onslaught from the public sector unions? And this is where, frankly, independent expenditure PACs like the one I run and C4 organizations and think tanks like the one you run, Illinois Policy Institute, come in to provide some of the cover for people to do the right thing. I mean, this goes back to Milton Friedman's famous formulation that politics is the art of getting the wrong people to do the right thing.
Well, that goes back to the point we talked in an earlier segment about Sam McCann, the union-funded Republican that your PAC is focused on taking out. Well, that, accountability works two ways. And I think what people who are pro-union Republicans are going to continue to learn over time, because this is not the first time this has happened. Sandy Pijos might remember, she's a former state rep that you were somewhat involved in removing.
Yes.
Also a union-funded Republican. It's cheaper for people on the right to take out union-funded Republicans who don't vote with their constituents than it is for them to get the benefit if they stick it out. In other words, it's a fairly inexpensive proposition to create this mechanism of accountability for worker freedom.
Hopefully we'll have a couple more examples to add to the
I sure
pantheon of examples that you were just describing.